Well, hello again, and welcome to episode 7 of Azul's Brewing Better Java LinkedIn Live series. I'm Andy Savitz, CMO at Azul. And if this is your first time joining us, the goal of our show, Brewing Better Java, is to bring thought leaders in the 8 million member Java community to you in a brief 20-minute live format to discuss topics trending with the Java programming language and our investments in Java. So today we got a pretty juicy topic. It's Java 17 and the impending end of the 3-year free term under Oracle's no-fee terms and conditions license, which was introduced 3 years ago in September of 2021. And as we're going to learn and as we're going to talk about in our discussion, organizations that have adopted the free version of Java 7 in commercial production environments that want to continue to update and patch their releases of Java 17 will need to move to the more restrictive Oracle Technology Network License Agreement and pay for a Java SE Universal License in just a couple of weeks. Okay, so that's a mouthful, but it's also a pocketful of dough and something that takes a lot of consideration. So joining me today to dig into this discussion is the remarkable and savvy Simon Ritter, Java champion extraordinaire and the deputy CTO of our company, Azul. So why Simon? Because he's one of the 386 Java champions around the world. He's a regular speaker at large Java events and user groups, and he's the author of Open JDK Migration for Dummies. And on top of that, he is the deputy CTO of Azul, and he spends most of his time advising organizations like yours and our customers on how to implement and architect their Java applications and infrastructure and how to optimize their commercial license agreements as well. Things like we're going to be talking about today for Java, for JDK Java 17. So Simon clearly knows his stuff. And when it comes to Java, we're pretty excited always to have his participation in Brewing Better Java. So welcome, Simon.
Thank you very much. As usual, it is a great pleasure to be here. Always happy to talk about things Java. And as with Java over nearly 30 years, things are never stationary. Things are always changing. So yes, we've got plenty to talk about today.
All right. So Simon, are you ready to talk some Java?
Absolutely.
Let's do it. All right. So this slide, represents a couple of questions I'm going to ask you, Simon, and it's a bit of a mouthful. But I also wanted to make sure that when we ask the question for for our audience, that it's really clear. They can see the complexity of what we're discussing. So I'm going to start and ask you, Simon, how and when will users of Oracle JDK 17 in production that want to continue to update their Java version be impacted by Oracle's no-fee terms and conditions NFTC license policy that was introduced a couple of years ago in September of 2021, or a few years ago?
Right, yes. So a little bit of background on this. Several years ago, Oracle decided to change the way that they were developing Java. And I'm sure everybody here knows that we switched to a 6-month release cycle. So it was very fixed in terms of how long there was between releases. Rather than it being 2, 3, or even 4 years, we're now 6 months between each release. And one of the impacts of that was that it wasn't going to be possible to offer extended support and maintenance to the Oracle JDK for all of those releases. And Oracle said that what they would do is use a similar approach to other companies like Ubuntu, for example, who have long-term support releases. And they said, okay, JDK 8, which is what everybody was using at the time, that would be a long-term support release. Then the next one was going to be JDK 11. And then they would have 3 years between each long-term support release. So JDK 11, the next one, very logically, is JDK 17. JDK 17 was released. It was a long-term support release, but then Oracle also made a couple of other changes. They said that rather than having 3 years between long-term support releases, they would have 2 years between long-term support releases, meaning the next one is JDK 21. That's the one we have right now. Now, the other thing that Oracle said was that for the Oracle JDK, they were going to change the license for JDK 11 and moving forwards to this Oracle Technology Network License Agreement, which requires you to buy a Java SE subscription if you want to use it in typical production environments. Then with JDK 17, there's lots of changes. They said that they would change the license for JDK 17 and moving forward to this no-fee terms and conditions. Less restrictive means that you don't need to buy an Oracle Java SE subscription for most commercial uses. But they said that that license wasn't going to be in effect forever. It would only apply to each of the long-term support releases until 1 year after the release of the next long-term support release. So this is where we get into the details. So we have JDK 17, which was a long-term support release under the no fee terms and conditions license. So lots of people are using it without having to buy the universal subscription. 3 years from there, 2 years from there, the next long-term support release, JDK 21, and then 1 year after that is 3 years. So that means that we're now hitting that September deadline, which is why we're talking about it today. So effectively, we're switching from the no fee terms and conditions license to the Oracle Technology Network license agreement for JDK 17. And that's what's happening this month and technically next month, because we'll kind of get into the details of that as well.
Clear as mud. I mean, Simon, it makes sense, and I think anybody that licenses Java generally understands that sequence. I think what you're saying is that basically, Oracle started charging for Java, but then they loosened that restriction and started allowing individuals to use the newer versions of Java for free. But that 3-year term is coming up for Java 17. Now that Java 21
yes,
is hitting its 1 year mark.
Yes.
And so it's going to introduce some complexity now. And there was a new pricing and licensing change that came out in January of 2023 to OTNLA pricing. Is there a different, or is there additional impact of that?
Yeah, so that's a different thing, you see, because the one that we're talking about with JDK 17 is where they're changing the license that you use for using the actual JDK. The second question we got there is, how does it relate to the change that was made in January 2023? That was about pricing. So Oracle said, for the Oracle Technology Network License Agreement, where you need a Java SE subscription, previously you would be paying the price of the Java SE subscription will be based on your usage. So they would count the number of cores that you were using to run your server-side applications. There was a multiplier that you needed to use depending on what type of core it was. That would then calculate how much you had to pay for servers. On the desktop and laptops, they used a thing called Named User Plus, which meant that you had to count how many people were using these desktop computers, not just how many desktop computers you had. But at least the great thing about that was it was based on usage. So the more you use Java, the more you would pay. The less you use Java, the less you would pay. Very logical. Then Oracle decided that they would simplify the way they priced the Java SE subscription, and they would simply count how many people you employ. And that's full-time employees, part-time employees, contractors, and even any employees of companies outside of your company that are supporting Java applications. So you then have to multiply that by a number, and potentially that can be a very big number.
Thanks, Simon. Okay, so let's advance the conversation now a little bit about Java 17. As you know, and as you kind of participated with us, Simon, we recently released a new survey and report, the Oracle Java Usage Pricing and Migration Report, and had close to 1,000 respondents in the Java community that talked about the trends and the adoption cycles for them in Java, things that they're feeling, within the Java community. So it's great, terrific insights, particularly around working with Oracle. Something that Oracle's done a tremendous job on is, the continued growth of the Java programming language. Likewise, allowing companies to be able to find ways to migrate to the newer releases. And I think it's been incredibly successful if we look at this chart, because we start to heavyweight the Java versions. I think that it's started to heavyweight towards the bottom, which is that newer versions are being adopted. So I wanted to just start by asking you, why has Java 17 become the most commonly adopted version of Java?
Yes, so that is a good question. And if we leave this slide up for a little bit, so I can talk about the chart, you can see that there are 4 bars which kind of stick out. First one is JDK 8. Now, that's the one that, as I say, when Oracle made the licensing changes, there was one that everybody was really using at the time because it was the current version. And that's maintained its popularity. I think the reason for that is because there are a lot of people who are running older applications, and it's the old adage of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So if it's running quite happily on JDK 8, they don't see a need to move it off that onto newer versions because JDK 8 is still supported. Now you can see that the purple one is JDK 11. That was the next long-term support release. Obviously, there will be a number of people who are thinking to themselves, right, we're deploying commercial applications. Let's keep them on long-term support releases for the Java version. So they moved to JDK 11. But then when JDK 17 came out, they then moved to the next one, which was JDK 17. Now, the reason JDK 17 is actually bigger than JDK 21 is because what you find with a lot of enterprise users when they're running mission critical applications, there's an air of conservancy. They're quite conservative in terms of their approach, which is to say, okay, JDK 21's come out, it's a year in since it was released, but let's wait a little bit longer before we move on to that, because we know that everything's running quite happily on 17, and we'll see how that goes. But also with the licensing change that we're seeing now, I think that's going to push a lot more people onto 21 from 17. They've been using it for free up until now, and they're getting the impetus to say, right, let's move to 21. But right now, 17 is the most popular because it's stable, it's still maintained, and people can continue to run their applications without any problem.
All right. So Simon, companies use all different Java versions in development and production. How do I know if my organization is using JDK 17 if I'm subject to this whole conversation that you and I are having right now?
Yeah, that's one of those questions that is a little bit tricky. A lot of companies will use software asset management software. So there's things like Flexera, Snow, those types of software. And what they allow you to do is to have a view of your entire estate, and you can see what particular systems are running which particular versions of Java, and even which providers of the version of Java that you're getting. So that gives you an easy way to run a report and say, okay, I can see these machines are running Oracle JDK, I can see these machines are running Oracle JDK 17, and so on. So if you've got a software asset management software, your life is fairly easy. If you don't have that, life becomes more complicated. And the reason for that is that the Java tends to be separate from the application. Some applications will bundle a JDK because they want a specific one, and the licensing of that will be handled differently. But most Java applications you tend to find is that they say to you, right, Java application, install the JDK on your machine, and then it becomes the default, so you can just run your Java application from there. If you do that, you need to keep track of where those JDKs are installed on your machine, which versions they are, and so on. Without software asset management software, it is up to you as a user to figure out which machines you have installed and which versions you have, and so on. Certainly, we've worked with a lot of customers where we've got some scripts that we have that do similar things to the software asset management software, but allows you to probe and find out which versions are installed on which machines and so on. But you would need something like that to verify where you've got things installed and which versions and which releases they are, and so on. It becomes a complicated process.
You hear a lot of companies say, I don't use Java 17. No, you do actually use Java 17, whether you know it or not. And I want to stay free. I don't like to spend money, Simon. So I want to move from Java 17 to Java 21, or a free version of Java. How easy is it to make that upgrade?
Right. So this is one where it's, again, it's an interesting discussion, because if you look at the compatibility that you get with Java, Java compatibility is really very good. The only time that we've seen any kind of, I wouldn't even say significant, but any version change where it has involved more work to move from one version to another was JDK 9. And that was the introduction of what's called modularity into the JDK. There was the encapsulation of some APIs, and it meant that some people had to do a bit more work to migrate. But pretty much everybody's got past JDK 9 now. What we're seeing is that the compatibility that you have between older versions and newer versions is really very good in Java. It's one of the reasons why Java is such a popular language, is people know that if they run their application on JDK 11, moving it to JDK 17 isn't difficult, moving it to JDK 21 isn't difficult either. So technically the switch from 17 to 21 is not going to be a huge problem. But we have to add a caveat to that, because people are faced with the possibility of having to move to newer versions of Java in order to avoid the Oracle Technology Network license agreement and having to buy a Java SE subscription. So moving from 17 to 21, not difficult, but there's no guarantee that when you get to the next long-term support version, that there isn't going to be another thing that changes, which will cause you problems in terms of your migration. And to give you an example about that, what we need to think about is things are being removed from the JDK as well as added. Java's nearly 30 years old. There's been a long period of time where we've added more and more features to Java, but now since JDK 9, they're doing a sort of cleanup and getting rid of these old features that nobody uses anymore, or at least theoretically nobody uses anymore. And one of those that we've just seen recently, I was talking to a customer about this, is that there is a part of the Java runtime called the security manager. And the security manager has been deprecated for removal. Now, that sounds quite scary because you think to yourself, oh, security manager, that's important for security. Am I going to remove the security manager? And you think, hang on, doesn't that mean Java is going to be less secure? Well, the answer is no, because the security manager actually relates to applets, which were used way back at the beginning of Java when it was deployed on web browsers and web pages and so on. But it's one of the things that doesn't tend to be used by many people, but some people do use it. And so if you've got an application, the customer that I was talking to, they have an application which doesn't use applets, but they decided to use the security manager in a different way. It was a feature that was available. They relied on it. They built their software around it to add extra security functionality to their systems. And now they're faced with the problem of, okay, JDK 21 will allow them to continue using the security manager, but it's very likely that in JDK 25, the next long-term support release, security manager is going to disappear. And there will be other things that will be removed from Java, other APIs, other bits and pieces that are deemed no longer critical to people's applications. And you have to think very carefully about that need to move to the next long-term support release. How easy is it going to make that jump every 2 years, which is what it's going to have to be from now on?
Well, I like to be an early adopter. I like to be up on the latest stuff. But in reality, Simon, that's not going to be possible for every organization to make those updates, to invest that time, to make those changes within an infrastructure that they feel safe and secure about and stable. So are there other alternatives, Simon, as opposed to just making an upgrade to a newer release of Java to not pay these exorbitant fees?
Yes, and this is where we come to the fact that Java is open source. Now, the analogy I like to use here is that Linux is open source. And if you want to run Linux applications, it's unlikely that you're going to go to the linux.org website, you're going to download all of the source code, you're going to build a distribution of Linux, install it on your machines, and run your applications. Very complicated task. So what you do is you get a distribution, binary distribution of Linux, and you will get that from somebody like Red Hat or Ubuntu or whoever. Now, the same thing applies to Java. Java is open source. There is an open source project called Open JDK, and the source code that's in that project is what Oracle use to build their JDK for distribution. We at Azul and other people like Amazon and Microsoft and so on take the same source code and we build that and create a distribution. So there are alternative distributions available to you which will run your applications in exactly the same way because you're building from exactly the same source code. And we even have a test suite, which is different to Linux. Linux doesn't have a formal specification. Java does. Formal specification with a comprehensive test suite that we can use to verify that what we're producing in terms of our binary distribution matches exactly the standard and is therefore functionally identical to what Oracle provides you. And that means that we know that you can run your application in exactly the same way on our version, or our distribution, I should say, not version, our distribution of Java, rather than Oracle's distribution of Java. And the same thing applies to different applications, so that you can run your application without having to worry about it. So it's all good on that sense.
Yeah, a test suite that we license from Oracle, the Technology Compatibility Kit or TCK. So
exactly, yes.
Well, Simon, informative, always a pleasure. Always fun to be able to hang out with you. Better when we're in person, not when we're virtual. For everybody on the call, hopefully this helped shed some light on obviously a pretty complex and difficult, problem to grasp and understand. We're not, lawyers, and this isn't the stuff that we do on a day-to-day basis. But hopefully Simon's been able to kind of demystify some of the complexity for you in regards to Java 17. Now you have the choice. Do you want to migrate to Java 21? Keep your apps where they are, but you got to pay the piper, or do you do something different than that? So, and start looking at Java SE alternatives with commercial support and expertise. So, but hopefully that's become more clear. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we do have 2 RF codes here on the slide. One of those is for you to get more clarity with a post that we published on how to go back into, or to understand some of the complexity with the pricing and the licensing terms as Simon has talked about today. So that's there on the left. And then on the right, if you're interested in more about the survey and report, the Oracle Java usage, pricing, and migration, that's also available for you to download there on the right. So, and of course, if you have any questions at all and you want to get further clarification on what we discussed today, don't hesitate to email myself, or if you really want the expert, to email Simon. Our emails are there on the side. So that concludes our episode 7 of Brewing Better Java. Thanks again, Simon, for joining us today.
Okay, thank you.